Hi, everyone. Can you all hear me? Thanks. I'm sorry that you have to hear my kind of raspy voice, but fortunately, you won't hear from me the whole time because we've got Emma and Macklin here as well. So thank you for having us today. We're representing Greenscape's North Shore Coalition, which is a regional coalition aimed at stormwater and water conservation education. Today, we're going to focus a little more on our MS4 efforts with our communities. So we're going to be talking to you about that. I know that there are a lot of technical experts in the room, and we like to say we take your expertise and your data and we distill it down and educate the public, sometimes at a more basic level than we often talk about in the office, but we try to hit many facets and many levels of education. So we'll give you kind of a sampling of some of our work, and hopefully you can think about this model as maybe a potential for the region that you are in. Oh, and that left. There we go. We're rocking and rolling. All right, so we are from the Ipswich River Watershed Association, the Merrimack Valley Planning Commission, and Anna Sheridan from Salem Sound Coast Watch, who is our fearless leader, could not be here today. But those are the three organizations that make up this coalition, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Here is a map of our currently participating communities. So everybody in green is current members, although we just sent out our FY26 letter of service, so we're still kind of getting that stuff back. But as you can see, we cover area all the way from Salem Sound up to the Merrimack River. So it's quite a large area. For, Ipswich in particular, a lot of the communities in our watershed are pretty small. They have very small DPW, small utility staff, and small town staff in general. So one of the things that we're able to really do is provide kind of a service that they might not otherwise be able to complete themselves or complete as timely. And so being able to kind of farm out that education and meet that requirement without having to do too much is really, really helpful to many of our smaller communities. So what is the mission of Greenscapes? Our mission is to promote and protect beautiful landscapes for clean and plentiful water on the North Shore of Massachusetts. Very aspirational. And some of those goals related to that mission is to provide outreach and education to support municipal compliance with MS4, and also we do some Water Management Act compliance. Empower and educate residents about water resources for better water quality and better water quantity. Those two issues are really, really big for all of our communities and kind of focus areas for everything that we do. And also to be a resource for homeowners and businesses to reduce their water bill and cut down on pollution. So we really tried to provide access to resources, access to education, and also be an additional point of contact for folks to take some of that burden off of our municipalities, but also just to provide another avenue, a different face to kind of some of the same things that we talk about a lot. So the history of Greenscape.
Thanks, Molly.
I'm sorry, I'm much shorter than you.
No, it's okay. Yeah, my name is Macklin Weir. I'm from the Merrimack Valley Planning Commission. So yeah, as a brief history, yeah, that's probably better. Maybe. Does that work? I can hold it.
That's as high as it goes. I'm sorry about that.
It's okay. No, yeah. All right. Yep, that's great. All right, yeah. So the Greenscapes actually started at from the South in the North Shore Watershed Alliance, which later became Water Smart, and then our partner organizations, MVPC, Irwa, and Salem Sound, we brought it to Essex County as the Greenscapes North Shore Coalition. So the original purpose of this group back in the day was more geared towards teaching residents and landscapers on how they could furnish their lawns while still, how it could be attractive landscapes and gardens without really overusing water and the overuse of chemicals. However, in 2010, Greenscapes kind of geared more towards MS4 compliance. So helping municipalities kind of check their MS4 requirement boxes. And that's through, like Molly had said, we do a lot of outreach, water conservation outreach, education to the residents, developers, commercial businesses, and industrial or industrial facilities as well. Okay.
Yeah, so a little bit about us and how we function. So there's three organizations participating in this coalition. The Ipswich River Watershed Association, we're a nonprofit and we work for the protection, conservation, and sustainable management of the Ipswich River watershed now and for future generations. And our watershed covers about 350,000 people. Salem Sound Coast Watch is another nonprofit working to improve the quality of the Salem Sound and its watershed, home to more than 200,000 people, doing this through municipal partnerships, scientific investigation, education, and stewardship. And then our quasi-government partner, MVPC, is a regional planning agency serving 15 towns and cities in the Merrimack Valley, working to foster cooperative efforts, resolve common regional problems, and allow our communities to plan jointly and achieve greatest benefits. So we each bring kind of a unique perspective and a unique set of skills to the coalition, which I think allows us to use these economies of scale and not only think about education on a regional level, we can customize things for each community, but to make sure that kind of our messaging across is consistent, is understandable, is we can reach different people kind of based on who we are. And for a lot of our municipalities, again, who might be smaller or might have constraints or hurdles when it comes to public outreach, we tend to be a little more nimble. And so we can get out to kind of certain events or certain places that they might not necessarily have the time or ability to be able to. So how does this get funded? That's a big question. So each of our participating municipalities actually pays an annual fee, and this covers the bulk of our program work. And it includes some of the projects that we'll highlight. And so annually, we have a number of publications that hard printouts that get passed out to all of our communities. We provide a number of things that Macklin's going to talk about. And we also provide a fifth grade stormwater program that Emma will touch on. And we also provide specific kind of tailored items, which we'll talk about. And then outside of that, special projects, we pursue grant funding to do kind of bigger cooperative projects through, for example, DEP's MS4 grant, which I'm sure we're all working on right now. So they moved that deadline up a little bit. So I'm also going to let MVPC highlight some of their specific MS4 services they offer.
Yeah, thanks, Molly. So just a little bit about the work that I personally do at the Planning Commission, and then we can get back to Greenscapes. So we're really well situated as a regional planning agency because we, like Molly had said, oversee 15 towns and cities within our region. So we help not only them on the individual scale of, submitting their annual MS4 report, but we also host a stormwater collaborative, which is comprised of DPW staff and engineers, where we meet monthly to discuss best practices. We help with collective purchases, like we just have put in a bid for road salt for a lot of our communities. And that's, like I said, sometimes we have guest speakers as well. That's a monthly reoccurrence. So kind of really gears up towards the winter months as well, talking about plowing, like I said, road salt, things like that. We also do offer MS4 assistance for our communities, helping them submit that annual report. We'll do facility inspections as well. And through Greenscapes, we do the public education aspect as well, which municipalities tell me personally, like it's the best money they ever spend. So that's always great to hear. And then we also do some watershed-based planning, which is for those who might not be familiar, that's watershed management plans are um, oh wow, just lost my train of thought. Watershed management plans. Yeah, so it's basically impaired or bodies of water that it's a you don't have to adhere to completely blank on my words, but each water body you set this guideline for procedures you want to follow to mitigate pollution from non-point source pollution, and it basically opens up an avenue of funding sources for you to install best management practices or BMPs for your watershed. So we offer, like I said, a few regional approaches to stormwater at the Planning Commission level. All right. Now back to greenscapes. We do also provide a number of community services that are again designated to help meet the MS4 requirements and support overall public education and stormwater or around stormwater. So that can include our workshops, presentations, and community events. For example, we've held a seed bomb presentation, which was in North Reading, or a workshop rather, in which we helped inform the public about the benefits of native species. There is a picture of one of, we've done rain barrel events as well, where we can, teach children and their parents about the importance of stormwater management, or in this, we've also, with the rain barrel, about water conservation measures, things like that. We also will do print and digital educational materials. So we provide rack cards, brochures, and other printables in English and Spanish for communities to keep their municipal buildings, or to send to residents directly. So for example, we brought with us two of our materials. One is a Scoop the Poop card that we can offer at dog license renewals for each year. We will also provide or create social media kits, which are usually themed for each month. So for example, during the winter months, we will have one focused on reducing road salt and using alternative de-icers. In the summer, like Ed said, it might be more focused on water conservation. In the fall, maybe it's about leaf litter, things like that. And then just looking my notes real quick. One of the other services that Emma here will get into in full detail a little bit in a second here is our Keeping Water Clean fifth grade program, which is just such a fantastic program. One of the other materials that we did provide here today as well for you all is our Greenscapes Guide, which I highly recommend taking a copy home with you. This contains a comprehensive discussion on the importance of small-scale stormwater management practices and how small changes at your home or in your community can make a big difference to protect our water resources. Suggestions for do-it-yourself, greenscaping projects, watering routines, and a list of native plants are included as well. Yeah, I really like our booklets here, and I give them out to anyone that I can, especially if you're a gardener. Really helpful. So as part of the program, we also prep the public education portion of each community's MS4 report and send these individualized reports out to our communities. Like I had said, as I'm doing the MS4 communities, or reporting all these communities, just tell me how much they appreciate being a part of the Greenscape. So it's really helpful for them. That's a QR code to some of the social media that we've produced in the past as well. And I'll hand it over to Emma now for some Keep It Water.
Awesome. Thank you, Macklin. Okay. I'm very excited to talk about keeping water clean. So I feel very comfortable bragging about this program because I didn't create it, but whoever did was genius. I'm the environmental educator at Ipswich River Watershed Association, but actually folks from all three of our organizations, so Salem Southwest Water, Valley Planning Commission, and IRWA, will bring this program to fifth grade classrooms. So, we all sort of share the load of bringing this program across the North Shore. So what is it? So keeping water clean, it's all about learning about where your drinking water comes from, what happens to your wastewater when it goes down the drain. We target fifth grade for a couple of reasons. So it fulfills some important math STEM learning standards for fifth grade. And it also meets MS4 permanent education requirements. We have happy teachers and we also have happy municipalities. And we are, last year, I think we engaged about 3,000 fifth graders and their teachers. This program started, I want to say in 2016 with just a few schools and has expanded to 24 of our 28 communities in the last year. So it's a great way to spread the word far and wide. And maybe you're thinking, well, fifth graders don't really have a whole lot of power to deal with stormwater in their community. Well, here's the thing: is they bring that information home. And another genius part of this program is that it includes volunteers, community volunteers, to run the stations that I'll talk about on the next slide. So for every school that we visit, we're getting, you know, around at least 5 adults, up to maybe 15 adults, depending on the size of the school, who are basically becoming experts in these stations that we're bringing to the 5th graders. So not only do the 5th graders get this information and spread it along, but also a few adults get this information and really take it to heart too. So I love this program for that reason, that it engages the community while fulfilling these requirements. It's super easy to implement. The program runs for about an hour for a class. And consists of everything a teacher could want. It has a pre-programmed PowerPoint that covers vocabulary, watershed topics, things that are included in the 5th grade science MCAS. Then the program itself happens. We bring everything in. We train volunteers for an hour before school starts. And then we run the program for the full day. It usually takes 1 to 3 days to complete for a school. And then afterwards, there's a follow-up activity. So there's a worksheet and also a Jeopardy game to increase that learning in kids' minds. So as an educator, I get really jazzed about this program, and I'm going to show you some really beautiful pictures and explain the stations to you. So we have 5 stations that we use. This program has evolved over the years. I think we had as many as 7 stations at one point, too much for an hour. But the 5 stations that we currently use are these. So our first station is mapping your watershed. We have these big maps of communities with watershed layers on top. MVPC's GIS team does that for us. Thank you, MVPC. And students are able to take dry erase markers and really mark up the maps. We even use Play-Doh to add elevation to the maps. The goal of that station is to introduce students to the idea that they can see where water is flowing in their community. And also to locate themselves on the map, get familiar with bodies of water that are near them, see if there are impervious surfaces or green spaces near them. One of the map layers we have is watershed protection areas around drinking water reservoirs, so they get exposed to all of that. We have a problem-solving card game. We call it Water Heroes. If you're familiar with the gameplay for Apples to Apples or Cards Against Humanity, it's kind of like that. A little bit more tame. There is a problem card that's presented, and then students have a handful of solution cards, and the problems have something to do with water quality or water quantity. So, you know, one scenario is that the beaches are closed because after a storm event, there was bacterial contamination. So students will read that problem, look at their hand of cards. Solutions range from adding, permeable pavement or a rain garden to picking up after your dog. Lots of different possible solutions. Each student plays the solution in their hand that they think might be the best fit for that problem. And then depending on whether they're playing collaboratively or competitively, they can decide who has the best solution. I usually leave that up to the volunteer. We have a stormwater runoff station. Has anybody here used an EnviroScape before? Okay, I figured this was the crowd for that. Yeah, so we have an EnviroScape. If you don't know what that is, it's a plastic watershed model. It shows a little community, and you can add pollutants to it. So you can discuss with students what kinds of things might be running off into their local waterways. Kids love that one. Just a tip, if you've used the EnviroScape before, you can take sponges and add them in to be able to construct your wetlands. Fun way to add a little solution in there. We have a groundwater model. The brand for this is Envision, if you're looking for one. The groundwater model shows what's going on beneath our feet. It shows groundwater infiltration. It connects the water cycle to the earth beneath our feet, which is another 5th grade learning standard. And it also has some dice so you can visualize what happens if somebody's septic tank needs to be serviced and perhaps something is going wrong where the sewage from the septic tank is maybe leaching into a lake. It also has wells, so you can demonstrate what happens when you're pulling water from wells, what happens to the surface water and groundwater levels. And then finally, our 5th station is a wastewater demonstration. We have samples of wastewater in its various stages from dirty to clean, courtesy of the Massachusetts Water Resource Authority. They loaned those out to us. We also run through a little experiment in that station. We take some toilet paper and some flushable wipes. We put them into some toilets, which are just jars. We have students flush the toilets to see what happens when those things break down. That's more about, maintaining your septic tank, or making sure that pipes aren't bursting underground. That's really important. So those are our 5 stations. We really love the program. Happy to answer questions if you have any later on, but for now, I'm going to pass it back to Molly.
So that's some of our standard stuff that we do every year. But as I mentioned, we do pursue special projects and work on initiatives together as a group, primarily on things that we can either pilot and then, give out to our communities at scale. So we're going to highlight a couple of these in a minute. I will say our dog waste pilot is the most recent one, which we ended up doing in Salem. We're hoping to kind of expand some of this for this next round of the MS4 grant if we can. But I would definitely, we brought some of those Scoop It rat cards. If you want to take some home, you are welcome to. In addition, as I said, we're a resource. So the Greenscapes website, which I will say is about to be updated. But there's a number, all of these are accessible for download. And there's a number of videos on there that we produced during COVID. But we do try to kind of leverage our ability as a coalition to pursue funding and do some of these projects that maybe a smaller municipality might not have time to do. So one of those things that we already hit on a little bit, but that Emma will talk about in detail, is our Greenscape guide, which is one of our more, I would say, popular brochures.
Yes, I'll do this quickly because I'm watching the time. We have a few more slides to get through. But this is the Greenscapes guide. If you want to pick up a copy, we put some on the side table over there. This was originally created in 2007 when Greenscapes North Shore Coalition came together. And then it was redone in 2019 with the help of a grant to add in some really beautiful pictures, some up-to-date information. It's got local examples of best management practices, stormwater resilience in the back, but really it's useful for any community. And like Macklin said, it's great for gardeners. It's even got a gardening calendar on the back with some great suggestions for maintaining your lawn and your garden in watershed-friendly ways. If you scan that QR code, you'll also get to the digital copy. It's available online, but definitely pick up a copy for yourself on your way up today. So I'm going to pass it to Macklin, who's going to talk about some more past projects, or maybe it's Molly.
Yeah, we'll hit this quickly. I will say the Greenscapes guide, I'm a lazy gardener, so I need something that's very simple like that resource to help me. I know this morning someone else talked about a model bylaw toolkit, which I'm very excited to go check out. We also developed one. It's hosted on MVPC's website, and communities can use that. Basically, if you're wondering, hi, I want to update my bylaw regulations, but I have no idea where to start. What are other communities doing? It divides it into, you can search by basically certain topics, and we used Mass Audubon's bylaw review tool to kind of, develop that. In addition to this, we also did a bylaw review of stormwater planning and zoning bylaw for all of our communities and provided an analysis using that tool. And that was done, I think, 2023. That was completed, but we still have all that data on file, and we reach out to our communities as they go through their bylaw updates and provide them with that information. Say, hey, as you go through this, here's some, here's some analysis that you don't have to do that we've already done.
Great. Excuse me. Last project that we wanted to focus on, was our low impact development viewer, LID viewer. LID viewer was developed by the Greenscapes North Shore Coalition. It highlights not only LID projects, but also green infrastructure as well. And it basically takes the proposed LID projects that municipalities put forth, and it showcases their funding sources, project information as well, and any other associated costs But municipalities are able to easily access the work that has been completed and are able to quickly share and review projects which have been completed or planned for the region as well. So the LID and other, BMPs or best management practices are critical components of a community's ability to manage and clean stormwater in compliance with the MS4 permit. So that is through the Greenscape's website as well. Definitely super helpful. Like Ed said, for seeing what's been done, how it's funded, and kind of what's planned as well. So in conclusion, that's kind of our overview of what Greenscape Storm Shore Coalition is, the work that we do as a kind of regional stormwater approach. And I suppose we can open it up to questions then. Oh, yeah. Hold the questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you for introducing the topic of regional approaches to what we're thinking about here, which is stormwater. I'm here to sort of zoom in on a specific regional concern, which is how do we try to work together regionally, perhaps on a watershed scale, and how do we pay for it, really? Because ultimately, I think most of us are feeling the pinch these days. Grant funding is not what it used to be. And so a lot of folks that we work with are thinking about more localized funding sources, like a utility. So I'm here to throw out some ideas that I know are perhaps difficult in New England, because we all love our home rule and our independence. But there's a lot of reasons for us to think about stormwater in a regional way. And so I just wanted to brainstorm with all of you, and we're gonna finish the session with a Q&A, both for myself and the previous group of presenters. And I actually have a couple of questions prepped for you to sort of think about regional collaboration and what's really standing in our way. And what's standing in our way, and then perhaps thinking about organizations that may exist out there already that can help facilitate regional collaboration. So just keep that in the back of your heads. But here's a map of all the major watersheds in Massachusetts. So this is the way that water wants to go, but it is obviously not the way that it's managed currently. So what we're going to talk about today, quick introductions. I'm going to talk about very high level, what is a stormwater utility? And I know that Eilish has already covered the example of that, so we don't need to spend a lot of time on that. We're going to talk about why regional. I'm going to give a couple of models and examples of what's being done not in Massachusetts at the moment, and then sort of try to ground that in the New England context. And then, like I mentioned, Q&A and audience feedback. And I have a not so pleasant picture there of flooding, and this is local. This is in Worcester here, I think back in 2011 from Hurricane Bob. So these are, this is one of the problems that we're dealing with. Like a lot of folks today talked about water quality, but flooding is also a major concern. And of course, with the impacts of climate change and different storm patterns, like we're seeing more and more of these more catastrophic events that are really taxing our older infrastructure. And so all of that runs into funding. Like how do we take care of this? A little bit about myself. My name is Mary Chomkina. I'm manager at Raftellus. My work really focuses on stormwater utilities, water affordability, and the technology to support both. So happy to speak more about that with anybody who's interested, but a little bit about my firm. So Raftellus, we do everything for municipalities and utilities except engineering. That's the really short way of saying that. We don't do a whole lot of planning either, but we do strategic comms. We do a whole lot of finance work. We do management consulting. And so we really are coming at these issues from sort of like a holistic perspective. And we work nationally. So what I'm hoping to do today is to sort of bring a perspective from other places that may hopefully get your brains buzzing about what's possible out there. My team specifically, we're a team of about 20 consultants. We've implemented over 75 utilities across the US and Canada. So got a little bit of experience under our belts and happy to talk any any details about that. But this is where we worked generally, and the yellow ones are the stormwater utilities that we have either implemented or we like looked at their rates or revised their programs or done something else with them. All right, so what is a stormwater utility? As you guys are probably aware from, Eilish's talk, is that it's the utility construct is really sort of a fee for service. And we can talk about it as an organizational construct, right? Like a way to organize folks into a specific stormwater department as, a utility. But really, at its core, it is a fee for service and a funding mechanism. So this revenue can support existing stormwater services and compliance activities, or if, like a lot of people who are faced with a choice of whether or not to implement is because they want to do more, or they have regulatory pressure on them to do more. And so they're trying to bring in more funding, expand their level of service, expand their programs. Typically, this user fee is frequently established by an ordinance, sort of like a local bylaw. And generally, what we see across the country is that it's distinct. The money that is brought in through this user fee ends up being in its own enterprise fund, which is distinct from water and sewer funds, and distinct from the general fund. But that doesn't necessarily need to be the case. Usually, folks like to do that because they've done a whole lot of work. They want to have the money dedicated to their activities, specifically for stormwater, so no one else can grab at it. But we have seen that some folks decide to combine it with the sewer fund or the water and sewer fund, so they kind of have all the water related utilities together, and they have some flexibility to subsidize across different utilities. All right, so the basis for fees, as Eilish has already explained, and Wellesley and elsewhere, the best management practice these days is that it's the impervious surfaces on the parcel. So very simple way to remember this is those who pave pay, right? So the higher the impervious area, the more runoff you generate, the higher the fee. That's the really simple way to explain it. And so that's where the concept of equity comes in. Right now, if your municipality might be funding the stormwater program through the sewer fees, portion of the sewer fees, those fees are coming from customers who have water meters typically, right? So think of a parking lot that's its own parcel, doesn't have water service, doesn't have sewer service, creates a whole lot of runoff, right? They're not contributing. Some municipalities pay for the stormwater programs through the general fund. That's typically those funds are collected through ad valorem taxes on properties, and there's an equity consideration there because of course higher value properties pay more taxes, but on the other hand you have a lot of tax exempt properties that are not contributing, and that's maybe fine when it's a church or a small nonprofit, but like when you think about say a large hospital with a huge footprint or a large college, like I live in Rhode Island, so the city of Providence has a whole lot of different colleges, so Brown University, RISD, like none of them are paying for stormwater right now. So there's that equity concept too. So then like the little guy, right? Like the residential properties that are being taxed are subsidized in these large institutions and the impact that they're creating on the municipal stormwater systems. So is that fair? I mean, it really depends on what your community values, but that's the equity consideration. Those who pave, pay. So that's the general underlying principle behind stormwater utilities, but so why regional? So I listed just some considerations here about why we want to think about stormwater management and stormwater utilities on a regional scale. So as probably most people in this room know, water really doesn't care about municipal boundaries. Like that's, I think, one thing we can all agree on is that it goes where it needs to go, and it's managed differently across municipal boundaries. So this is one reason why we can think about collaborating. Standardized communications. I think the presentation before me covered that in in a beautiful way where, it's a whole region that's gotten together and, decided to standardize some of their communication about the importance of stormwater and, supporting the MS4 permit requirements, et cetera, et cetera. So not every single one of those teeny tiny municipalities has to really think about it separately. You also can have economies of scale. This is especially true, or especially important rather for capital projects. Again, thinking about how small some of our communities are here in New England, sometimes getting a large project that's necessary, perhaps, but very hard to pay for off the ground is a challenge. But if, for example, it was a joint project between 2 or more municipalities, that would be more feasible. So something to think about there. And then last but not least is that operational efficiency and uniformity of expertise, right? So currently we have, we have hopefully a person who's concerned with stormwater at every single municipality, Eilish, and, other folks across the board. Every single municipality may have different resources. Sometimes those people leave, sometimes those roles are not filled. But then if this is done on a regional scale, you kind of have a uniform approach, again, to that watershed scale issue that allows more of like an even management throughout the watershed. All right. So thinking about sort of the practical approach to a regional stormwater utility, there are lots of things that people can collaborate on, of course. The lowest hanging fruit for the folks that we've worked with who try to do regional approaches is the utility administration and billing. So if you want to do anything, typically your ability to do anything runs into funding, right? So you want to think about how you're going to raise the funds to do whatever it is that you want to do. And then once you have that collaboration in place, once you have the funding in place, you can then expand the suite of services that the utility may offer based on those capabilities. The administrative framework is also very important. So we have a wide spectrum of what can be done, right? So if we start over on the left, we know that, obviously people are implementing their own municipal, sort of separated local stormwater utilities across the region, different towns in Massachusetts. If some of those folks want to get together, if they're physically proximate, if they're in the same watershed, they can start working on shared services. They can implement some interlocal agreements, share equipment, et cetera. And so that's kind of like a loose coalition that's not super structured or as structured as that group decides that it wants to be. Very flexible. And then all the way on the right, we have a centralized entity. So think of the Boston Water and Sewer Commission, right? They have been doing water and sewer and stormwater for a very long time. They have recently implemented a stormwater charge that, really draws attention to the fact that now their stormwater operations are separate and distinct from their sewer operations. It's more equitable. But really that's a centralized entity that is, that's dedicated to the city of Boston. But I'll give some examples in a second about other regional entities that manage sort of a multi-jurisdictional utility that's more of a centralized entity. All right, so to talking about those two collaborative models, starting with the regional authority. It's a centralized legal entity. So there's an actual legal structure, like a legal underpinning for it. It oversees stormwater management across multiple municipalities, typically. Fees go directly to the regional utility. So they have their own billing authority and, I guess, revenue collection authority. And those revenues are used to implement stormwater management programs, do MS4 compliance, create and manage infrastructure, and provide asset management on a regional level. So it's really it's really its own authority. It does its own thing. often it collaborates with local governments, but it's separately funded and it has a lot of autonomy. A great example of this is the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District. I think I mentioned it in a previous session as an example of this. This is the entity that faced some litigation about a decade ago, but the stormwater fee that they've implemented was upheld, so they continue with it to this day. So it's really it's the region around the city of Cleveland, 57 member communities, including Cleveland. The district is a historic place. This is where famously the Cuyahoga River caught on fire back in the 60s, and the Clean Water Act was born. So they have been in the sewer management business for a very long time. And then they moved into the regional stormwater management in around 2013, 2016. So they provide sewer and stormwater services. So they have sort of they have the infrastructure that they manage, right? Both for sewer and stormwater. They manage the sewer treatment plants, as well as like large conveyance pipes. But they also provide support to local projects via their community cost share program, because there's also regional, I shouldn't say regional, there's also local stormwater programs that are managed by each and every one of these municipalities that also want to do projects that are local to themselves. So I believe 25% of the revenues that are collected through the fees go back to the communities to do those projects. And I think there's a cost share. They're not in the fee, the revenue from those fees don't entirely fund the entire project, but like the community comes up with part of the money for the project, and then the district comes up with part of the money. And then I believe it's usually the communities that implement the projects. But they have that additional support. It's not a grant program. It's not competitive. It's their money that the district collects for them, and they kind of keep it in reserve until they say, we got a project, and then, you know, they get the money. The nice thing about this is is that the fee is billed on the district bill. So the 57 communities don't have to come up with their own billing approach. And then the money, like I was saying previously, is distributed between sort of district needs and then the local community needs. And the revenue collected is about $53 million a year. And like I was mentioning, about 25% of it go into community cost share. So that's a pretty significant chunk of change. All right. Another example is the interlocal agreements, which was our model in the middle there on the spectrum diagram. So usually these are it's a decentral governance via agreements between municipalities, pretty loose compared to the regional authority model. And the opportunities for collaboration here include administration and billing, like what we were talking about before. That's the kind of the lowest hanging fruit. Service deliveries, or depending on what the local municipalities are trying to do, they can share in some of the service deliveries, whether if, you know, doing a street sweeping program that, you know, that spans multiple towns, for example, as opposed to having to contract, each town having to contract with its own contractor to do that, or doing it in-house, for example. They can try to share development standards. So for example, if everybody's in the same watershed, everybody might be subject to the same watershed specific regulations. It might make sense to align development standards, and the utility provides sort of a place for that type of collaboration. Public education and outreach, as we've already mentioned, as well as shared capital projects that we talked about a little bit ago. The nice thing about this model is that the municipality retains control over its local stormwater management policies. So if there's not a desire to really closely align with your neighbors, you don't have to. And then it's really, the enforcement here is that the local governments kind of have to enforce it themselves. So there's an example I'm going to talk about in a second that makes that more clear. So we have one of our clients is in North Carolina. It's the Granville-Person County Cooperative Stormwater Services, which is kind of a mouthful, but for short, we call it the Upper Falls Watershed Project. And the reason why we call it that is because it's the Upper Falls River watershed that is regulated very heavily by the state, and that regulation is the driver for this collaboration. So this the stormwater utility includes 2 rural counties, very sparsely populated. Within one of the counties, there's also 2 small towns and 1 city, and all located in the same watershed. The cost driver here, the reason why they decided to get together and create a utility to generate revenue, is because these watershed-specific regulations. It's the highest nutrient reduction target ever passed in North Carolina. So it's 77% reduction in phosphorus and 40% reduction in nitrogen, which is hefty. The reason why they're being pressured to do this is because the Upper Falls watershed drains into Falls Lake. It's a man-made lake, an Army Corps of Engineers project, and the water reservoir for the city of Raleigh. So very important, growing town, booming town, and in need of watershed protection. So what these folks decided to do is they created more loosely structured utility, where they're doing this through interlocal agreements. So all 5 jurisdictions retain their own autonomy. Jurisdiction stormwater rates are set specifically to their own revenue requirements. So the 2 counties and 2 towns and 1 city say like, okay, this is our planning level for the next 5 years. These are going to be our rates. And then the utility actually, then calculates, excuse me, the utility calculates what each individual customer's bill should be under those 5 individual rate structures. So a little bit complicated, but totally feasible. And the stormwater fees in this case are billed on the county tax bills. So I know that this is a little bit different in Massachusetts. The counties in North Carolina have a little bit more authority than I think locally here. They collect taxes, and so they're the ones who send out the tax bills, and then we distribute the revenues back to the local municipalities, like the 2 towns and the 1 city here. They get a sort of a remittance after that's collected on the annual basis, and that's the funding that the towns then use to work on their stormwater programs. Like I mentioned, is the shared billing, collections, and administration, as well as advisory services. I'll talk about that more in a second. Otherwise, there's separate service provision with an option to do collaborative projects. But as far as I remember, at the moment, they haven't quite gotten to the large regional project scale yet, except in their sort of negotiations with the state regarding compliance with these regulations. The venue for that is a watershed organization called UNRBA, the Upper Neuse River Basin Authority, which is a regional nonprofit organization providing scientific research to understand and improve water quality and facilitate collaboration through constructive conversation among stakeholders. So this is a venue for them to come together and say, how the heck are we going to meet these standards? Like, how the heck are we going to do this? And you'll see that it's the entire watershed. So 6 counties, 6 municipalities, 1 water utility. I believe that's the Durham County Water. And there are also soil water conservation districts included in there. So it's a much larger forum than the stormwater utility I just mentioned. And the driver here is that this is the forum, the Watershed Association brings together these folks for regular conversations and say, like, well, how are we going to move this forward with the state? How are we actually going to comply with the stringent water standards, water quality standards, and what's going to be our schedule? So part of the work here is these sort of constant negotiations and sort of stepwise work with the state. A lot of these entities are either more densely populated or better funded. And they have the resources to participate in this work as well as do other stormwater work. Except for these 5 that I named previously, that in order to be able to do this compliance, decided to form the regional stormwater utility a little over a decade ago, I want to say at this point, because these are more rural places and they just didn't have the resources or the funding to participate in this collaborative process and then also be able to comply. So out of this sort of framework within UNRBA collaboration, there's also an additional sort of more dense collaboration through the stormwater utility. So there's a couple of layers here. So in contrast to the work that they're doing with UNRBA, the stormwater utility group is really focused on utility administration and management. They're all involved in UNRBA. And they have a presentation with the regulating agencies, like specifically I think North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality is the other partner. And they share resources like I already mentioned, and they have access to expertise that they're able to access through membership in UNRBA, as well as through their regional collaboration among themselves, that they're able to say, like, get together and hire a consultant to do their own water quality analysis that can then be counterposed to what the state has said and say, like, well, okay, like we can land somewhere here in the middle. As well as regional like perspective, not just looking at the, like, what are we going to do here in our teeny tiny town of STEM, like, but how are we going to deal with this as a watershed? So that has been a slow moving, but a collaborative and successful process where it continues to be a conversation with the state. And it's kind of building on itself now for over a decade. So those 2 very different examples. I just want to throw that out there. There are many more out there. If some of you folks are familiar with the state of Minnesota, like they really do their stormwater management on a watershed scale, but they have like a state level, like, legal underpinning for that. And so it's kind of a harder standard to achieve, I think, elsewhere. But there are many different models that that provide some sort of regional collaboration examples that we can look at. And so I just wanted to throw those couple of things out there, let you think about how can this be potentially applied in New England or in Massachusetts. So in our context, we, of course, are facing the effects of climate change. There are also regulatory pressures that are under this administration are a little bit more uncertain, but, prior to January of this year, there were a lot of conversations about, like, well, the new MS4 permit and the RDA permit and how do they interact and, like, what are we going to do? That may all come back, but also those conversations have already started. Like, people are already, like, thinking about this, not just because they have to do it, but because they want to deal with the impact. Regionally, we have regional utilities being currently considered in the state of Connecticut. We are right now working with one of the council of governments there that is considering the plus and minuses and exploring the feasibility of a regional stormwater utility with its member communities. And it's a tentative sort of dip the toe in the water or the stormwater kind of exploration, but it is a serious thing that the state is funding through, actually, I think it's funded through their climate resilience fund. So they're really looking at it from the climate impacts perspective. Also in Rhode Island and around Providence, the concept of a regional utility was explored about a decade ago. Unfortunately, at the time it didn't pass, but it was a really serious exploration, really looking at it sort of like heavily urbanized areas and like how can we approach this as a group. But I just don't think they were ready for it at Ecatego. So if we were to think about this for Massachusetts or, regionally in New England, we could fund new, the collaborative utilities, the collaborative utility could, bring in revenue that could fund new collaborations as well as projects and management of existing assets. So both new projects and sort of existing assets in the ground. We could focus on larger shared projects that are harder for smaller towns to implement. And we may or may not be able to leverage current collaborative infrastructure, like, the stormwater coalitions that got mentioned, as well as watershed associations. I'm looking at you, Maurice. And, other venues that we may not have thought about it yet. So, with that, I think I'm going to close and open it up for Q&A before I pose my questions to you guys.
I'm getting close with talking about potential in New England, but do you actually think it's feasible to have a regional stormwater utility or something of the sort in Massachusetts when we are so municipal? Like you mentioned that the county level is there's so much more emphasis on the county than these other states, and that's so the billing is so much easier and taxing multiple municipalities. Like do you actually see a path forward in Massachusetts? And I'm actually feels like NWRA is the regional, like they're regional for water sewer. Like could they tax stormwater? I'm just like, I don't know. I'm just curious what your personal opinion is on whether it's actually feasible here or whether there's so much emphasis on municipalities having control that it's just like not doable.
Well, I was hoping not to start out with my personal opinion, but I wouldn't be up here if I didn't believe this was possible. I think as the need for funding increases, people are going to be more open to thinking creatively, frankly. I've only been a resident of New England. I went to college in Boston, but then I left. I've only been a resident of New England as an adult for about 3 years now. So I'm still very much learning about how things work around here. And I don't want to speak out of turn, but there does seem to be a very strong emphasis on sort of individual management, individual responsibility. There's nothing wrong with that. But then when you're facing larger problems, like you do run up against very real constraints of, well, can I do this on my own? And it could be regulatory pressures, or it could be, response to climate change, right? Like the engineers in the room will back me up, like some of these flood control projects or flood response projects are very daunting. They're very daunting in terms of scale. They're very daunting in terms of funding. And so at what point do we reach sort of a breaking point between, wanting to be independent versus wanting to protect our properties and businesses? Right. So I think it's just a matter of what your area of concern is. And, I do believe it's possible is the short answer.
Just a little bit on that question. I have noticed that Massachusetts has a very strong network of watershed systems. I haven't quite noticed quite a strong network in other states. And so those watershed organizations might drive something like this. Stormwater management upstream definitely affects communities downstream.
Absolutely.
So,
well, I mean, that's definitely a potential avenue, kind of like what we were talking about with the North Carolina example. That work is really facilitated by, not administered, right? Not administered, but facilitated by a watershed association. And then the communities within it, some of the communities within it decided to get together form a stormwater utility through interlocal agreements. They figured out a way to collect those revenues. And yes, the county administration does make it easier, but that's not the only way to do it, right? So if there's a need, I believe people will always find a way to do it. So. Please.
Wondering what you've seen happening in those communities that are like bordering to watersheds, towards associations or like, how you see them breaking up, how they, in like assign who pays what, like how do you see, how in your experience has that gone so far?
The ones that are not part of the utilities, you mean?
No, it's like, for communities that are maybe bordering two different watersheds. Like, it's, so I'm from Municipal Watershed Association.
Sure.
Right, and we have communities that border the charm. So say we both, try to do a different kind of collaborative approach, like, a city like Cambridge that sits on the border, like, how would you see them breaking up, how they do the fees, or, have you ever seen that in your experience?
Oh, yeah. So these guys, going back to my North Carolina example, so Person County and Granville County is down here on the bottom right. The outlines, the jagged outlines you see is the outline of the watershed. It's not the border of the county. So there's actually, when we do the rates, it gets super fun because there are different rates inside the watershed and outside the watershed. So the entire county population is charged something, but the folks living inside the watershed get a much higher fee because they're the ones who are, contributing to the pollution within Falls Lake, and therefore it's recouped on a higher level from them. So there's definitely a way to do it. Please.
That's why I was curious. I mean, I don't know if any of your case examples from other places had, what comes first? So there's the regulatory environment that sometimes forms corporation. But then there's also, I would say, in my experience, at least in Massachusetts, it was really the fact that the watershed associations were able to bring funding to the table. And that made a lot of municipalities that typically would not have talked to their neighbor, want to talk and want to, of course, it's a scale issue. So you're seeing the benefits of working with your neighbor because there are only certain things that you can do at scale. But I also feel like there's a big part of like leveraging funding that became available because the municipalities themselves might not have been able to get that amount of funding. They were not necessarily working with their watershed associations. So having that as a driver for cooperation was a big thing, at least in Massachusetts. But then once you start, you think about, okay, who's going to have to pay more because now you're contributing to the pool of services. That's a different kind of
I'm gonna stop you right there because that's an assumption that you're making, right? Like if you're collaborating, you don't necessarily have to pay in a pool. Like these folks are collaborating, but like they're collecting the money that they're then using. They're like Person County isn't taxing or isn't collecting fees from the citizens that are then given to Granville County, for example.
Well, so let me just take an example. Say that we're Wellesley, we saw the somewhere and if tomorrow the Watershed Association comes and says, well, we're gonna have a regional collaboration which will impact, whatever utility it is that is now serving, would that not become a problem? Because I'm not saying double dipping, but it's basically like having the carrot versus the stick, right? It's a fee for service, which as a resident I feel compelled to pay because it's serving the town.
Mhm.
And we were sort of trying to match that with a regional approach that, you know, a downstream community might not see, or an upstream community, you know, it's not the same kind of pooling of resources with the impact and benefits being distributed.
Okay, I
That's
think,
kind of where I'm thinking the rub might be.
yeah, and I think you're getting at the issue of like the thorny issue of funding large scale regional capital projects, right? Like, so depending on where the project is located, depending on the nature of the project, uh, you know, it might benefit one entity more than another. And so it, like, in the context of these guys, like I mentioned, like, I don't think they have gotten together yet and done a collaborative project. They've done plenty of separate projects using this funding. But even in the case when they're being judged, or they're being evaluated on a regional watershed-based scale, they need to reduce their collective runoff to meet the regulatory requirements. It's still hard for them to kind of agree on what's going to be the best way to do that as as a large investment that may draw money from multiple communities. So that part is the hardest part. That sort of in like regional investment is the hardest part, especially when you don't have a centralized authority, kind of like we had in you know, around Cleveland here, to make those types of decisions, right? Like they keep 75% of their funding specifically so they can make those types of decisions because they have the legal authority to do so. So that is an issue. But again, it's, you know, it depends on what one is trying to solve. And it's hard to talk about it without being very concrete about, like, are we talking about like a flood management project that's gonna affect, you know, 75% of the people in the watershed and like reduce their flooding potential? Or is it something about water quality in like this stretch of the river or this particular water body? I mean, again, I think it's possible, and I think it depends on sort of the scale, people's ability to pay, and frankly, if it's a response to a catastrophic event, right? Like, think about what happened in Vermont like a year or two ago in the summer. And you know, there was much more conversation about flood management and the ability and the funding to do flood management after that happened. So anyways, I feel like I'm hogging the spotlight. Any questions for those folks over there?
Well, I mean, from the Charles River, I was impressed by this model, and I know that you guys also maintain some GIS layers for your communities that are somewhat stormwater related.
Yeah, definitely. So I think my organization, the Planning Commission, is hosts the GIS work with Greenscapes. We host a stormwater application through our web services. We have a platform called MyMap. It has many different layers of what municipalities might need, but specifically for their stormwater application, it has it's easy for the municipalities to keep track of like how often they're cleaning their catch basins, where the outfalls might be, if the outfalls have been inspected. That way, when you know MS Dorsey takes around the fall, they're able to sweat information quickly. As far as where we work with someone like or with the Greenscapes, we produce a lot of maps, like Emma has mentioned, that we bring like the schooling program as well.
Why? Have like an editorial comment and a question, but my comment is that when I see the way forward, it's easier for me to imagine us moving kind of more to this model where some of the planning and engineering resources and IT resources are shared regionally, and we've been talking with Jamie Poole about, you know, if we could get the phosphorus tracking and accounting program, you know, in the Charles River Watershed and Mystic and the ponds, and can we work with MAPC to do that? And I would love to hear your thoughts of, like, you know, do you guys consider growing the services that you offer to municipalities, like how, are you hearing from municipalities, like, here's things we're paying our consultants to do now, what if they could be done regionally? So that would be kind of my question to you, and then, to you, what do you see as like the problems with kind of scaling up something that's more like a regional collaboration on shared resources?
Yeah, I mean, that's a fantastic idea. I mean, where we hear interests, we try and, meet them for the interest. Of course, funding is always an issue. We're kicking around ideas for like our MS4 system grant, looking at, it could be anything from like LID projects or, otherwise green infrastructure. Certainly there's room for growth always, whether it's, I mean, we've covered a lot of the water bodies that we do as far as like watershed use planning might go. But there's definitely always, where there's interest, we have to try to have some conversations. Certainly a lot of our municipalities are interested in regional approaches, but they're certainly also kind of focused on what they're doing within their own borders. As far as I'm sure MAPC folks would be interested as well. I mean, they have such a huge reach, and they're actually broken up in some regions as well. But surely they have the GIS capabilities for something like this. I'm not familiar if they're doing that work already or not.
So I use MAPC in my regular road area and the back to the planner, and I've been like advocating for a similar stormwater collaborative that MAPC already has for MAPC to have. Continue to put the book in their ear, because I think it would be super beneficial because they've got such a wide reach, and maybe they can do things again at scale in a way that we might not be able to. So I do see maybe regional planning organizations potentially playing a role in that. I kind of think I like that law transportation, like just kind of thinking of those like that kind of regional scale is another thing to do it. It's larger than watershed, but they have some resources and skills already in place. So I'm definitely a advocate for it.
Alicia, I think you had a question.
I think what we always heard discussion of is regional collaboration possible because of how the contention municipalities are in Massachusetts. But like to get deeply philosophical about it, like I think about the European Union. I think about states and the democracy of the United States. And especially in the United States, right now we're looking at period of instability, where it seems like we have a lot of different states that have a lot of different priorities, and we're now starting to fall apart. But we still fall on this municipal. So when I think about regional stormwater, I see it in that sense. I see my municipality acting as the state, and that regional municipality, and that regional utility acting as local. And so I see it, if we get the European Union is possible, then bringing just more, she's gonna lead us. Leadership in it, and as the municipal employee, I know that I am there. I don't have, I should do it. That should be dealing with something already. So we really need that peer leadership, possibly from our existing nonprofits, possibly from the NPC, to give us like the concrete information about what municipalities are going to get out of it, like show us the actual numbers. And in one sense, these already exist. Like we have things in Massachusetts, we have the Central Massachusetts Stormwater Coalition. Those municipalities are already paying to be a member of that group, and they're getting things like education out of it. So, I mean, it's not every municipality, but I think, those kind of programs are showing that there are some aspects of stormwater programs that can work in that model. We just need some additional into that.
100%.
I know. And that's a great lead in, I think, to Mary's questions. So if you have any other questions for the speakers, please find them afterwards. But we want to, since we're running a little behind, we want to get to Q&A for the next session.
I think we kind of touched on some of them already, but like I still want to pose them. Uh I've been reflecting on your question a little more while we've been talking, and so to give big picture brainstorming fantasy land here, but if, for example, we had a collaborative venue, kind of like these guys in North Carolina found at Anerba. It's a place to get together, it's a place to talk, it's a place to sort of try to meet these regulatory goals. If we had that sort of venue and leadership from, say, a watershed association or another regional entity, a group of all or a subset of the participating municipalities could get together, could create interlocal agreements, kind of like they did here in North Carolina. So out of all of these guys, it's only, really 5 of them that got together, created interlocal agreements and decide that, okay, we're going to do stormwater utility. All of us are going to have different rates. All of us are going to have our own revenue streams. We're not going to share them. We're going to get our money. We're going to decide what we're going to do with them on an annual basis. If the individual towns that are participating in this regional collaborative utility do their own billing for existing utilities, kind of like Wellesley does, they could put those fees onto existing utility bills, or they can put those fees onto their annual tax bills. Either way, they're bringing in the revenue. They have the money coming in, and then you can start the ball rolling, right? Like, I hear you that like a lot of the collaboration that you guys have been seeing regionally has come from places like Max's organization that that has the resources to get those grants, to bring in the funding, to get people in the door to start these conversations. But my fear, especially in the current political climate, is those grants are harder and harder to come by. So like, is there another way? Is there another path forward? Right? That's what I think we're trying to explore here. And I know I jokingly say it's a chicken and the egg problem, but like it's really you like Macklin mentioned, it's always funding, right? Like you cannot have the staff, you cannot have the hours. I mean, there's only so much you can rely on volunteers to push anything forward. Like you need to have dedicated people in place, and you need to pay them for their time, essentially. So like once you have a little bit of that funding coming in, it can start growing, right? So that's just, again, my off the cuff, very rough sketch of how this can potentially be done within a Massachusetts watershed. So, my questions, and like I said, I think we touched on them. Well, you guys really touched on them, is that what barriers do you perceive for regional stormwater collaboration or utility creation? And I think it's that sort of like home rule feeling that we have here in New England, but I wanted to throw it out there and see like maybe there are other things, like maybe everybody hates their neighbors and just they don't want to work with them. Like or is it something else? Is it something else besides the sort of very strong sense of independence that is important and cultural and historical?
Yeah, one that I see is that every different county that at a very different level of compliance, knowledge, and implementation. So it's hard to kind of create a vehicle that serves all.
Okay. Did you have a comment?
Community.
In priority, you mean like just competing priorities across all municipal responsibilities, like schools, fire, general affordability, like things like that. Okay. Other things?
So, we think we have like two big regional collaboratives that exist. So we have the regional resilience collaborative, and then we have, or like stormwater collaborative. And we've gotten them to participate really well in the RC, like climate space, but it's really hard in the stormwater space. And we talked to the engineers, it's like, we just need to meet the LS4 requirements, and we can do no more. And you know, the same community, they participate very differently, you know, these two, like, people who might be in charge of the climate work are willing to show up and do other things, and engineers, it's like, oh, Joe, you need this permit to help you do that, and like, you can go with. But that's kind of the space where we're aiming that we, you know, keep those same communities and the same collaboratives. We just have very different levels of engagement between those two particular fields. And the funding is different, the prices are different, the permits are different.
I wonder how they would behave differently if they had stormwater funding for their resilience projects. Right?
Great question.
Just throwing that out there, folks. Okay, so hopefully okay, so I captured some of those notes. Anything else anyone wants to add to the barriers? Like, what else are we seeing as standing in our way?
I would just add, I'm not sure the way, but the physical infrastructure is usually built by municipality.
Correct, yes.
Whereas the NWA example, we do have a consolidated sewer that is regional and that.
Right, and then, you know, a lot of times they tie in, right? Like there's points for the tie in. So that's very similar to the Cleveland example, right? Like the regional 57 municipalities, you know, there's sort of the regional large infrastructure ties into the local infrastructure. I know the legal authority and the history there is very different, but I think a lot of regions organized around a larger city, like have a similar sort of infrastructure approach. So while I recognize that is, you know, different parts of infrastructure are owned and managed and paid for by different agencies, I don't necessarily see it as a barrier. It's just a sort of something to work out.
Kind of implies that I would say, you know, the governance models, which, you know, I think every time we're talking about, you know, collaboration in the face of regulatory compliance, it really comes down to what kind of governance model you're operating with. And I think going from home rule to watershed, sort of regional planning, you're tripping up because there are no regional governance models that are in place and working really well.
So if we were to say, again, fantasy land here, like if we were to have a regional MS4 permit as opposed to individualized MS4 permits, that would make things easier. Or, you know, now there was, you know, things are a little bit stalled at the moment, but like we were talking about the RDA before, and that's, you know, that's individual sort of larger industrial and commercial properties responsible for management of their stormwater runoff on site being sort of evaluated and regulated individually. But those properties exist in the context of larger municipalities within watersheds. It's really not clear how the RDA and the MS4 permits are going to interact. So like, who is going to facilitate that, right? Like the EPA is certainly not going to do that, right? But yeah, governance is a huge issue. And I think that's where existing organizations that bring different municipalities together for different collaboration models, like potentially have a role to play to kind of maybe not figure it out for them, but like provide a space where that can be figured out. And if there is room for iteration, like there is in a North Carolina model, proposals can be brought back to the regulator to say, well, you said X, we can't do 70% phosphorus reduction in 5 years. What can we do, right?
I'm so sorry, I don't wanna.
No.
Cut you off, but we are running a bit behind time.
That's okay.
So I don't, we're gonna get to your last question. But yeah, we're gonna take a quick 10-minute break, because like I said, we're running a bit behind time. So, and then we'll be back here at, 2:40. And then we'll do our last session on asset management, just wanna get you guys all out here before the traffic gets too bad. So.
Have a cookie.
Yes. Let's take some more.
Thank you guys so much. This was great. Really appreciate it. All right. So my name is Natalie Konsky. I'm a project manager and the resource data management technical specialist at Ty and Bond.
Cassandra Lachelle, also a project manager. We're both in our office, and I am the MS4 technical specialist in Ty and Bond's Stormwater Community of Practice.
So in today's talk, we're going to go through scaling your asset management programs for effective community impact. In this presentation, we're going to touch on the following topics. First, why an asset management program is worth it. Next, I'll go over the core components of an asset management plan, in addition to how best to get started with each core component in your community. And then Cassandra will wrap up the talk with some case studies where asset management programs have been implemented across a range of sizes. But before we get started, let's first define what is asset management. So asset management is about delivering a specified level of service to customers and regulators at an optimal life cycle cost and an acceptable level of risk with a strategy that ensures long-term sustainability of public assets. But put more simply, stormwater asset management is the process of maintaining the stormwater system to ensure it's functioning properly, lasts a long time, and provides the best value. So now that we've defined what asset management is, why does it work and how can it improve your community stormwater program? Generally, most communities only improve and replace stormwater assets because they have to. This is often costly and the results of a catastrophic failure event or a compliance issue. But by instituting an asset management program, we can shift from this reactive posture to a more proactive one. The graphic below shows an example of this reactive versus proactive approach, where historically stormwater assets are run to failure, versus in the asset management approach, where you can extend the life of the asset by performing routine O&M maintenance. So an asset lasts much longer and the rehab and replacement cost is much smaller. By shifting to this mindset, communities can save money in the long run by extending the life of the stormwater assets, especially since stormwater funds are often limited and there are constantly competing priorities. An AMP provides the framework for how to choose and plan without an infinite amount of funding. And an AMP also can prioritize projects with a defensible strategy and creates a centralized stormwater program. So here are the 5 core components of an asset management plan. The first component is to create your stormwater asset inventory and your asset condition. Next is the level of service. So this defines your community's goals of the program. Third is to conduct a criticality or risk analysis of your stormwater assets. Fourth is to quantify the life cycle costs of these assets. And finally, the 5th component is creating a long-term funding strategy for your stormwater asset management program. So in the next few slides, I'm going to walk through how each of these 5 components can be implemented in your community. So the first step is establishing your stormwater inventory. This is the process of trying to figure out how many assets you have, what types of assets you have, where are they located. For many small MS4 communities, you're required to map most of your stormwater structures by year 10. But keep in mind that culverts are often a gap of this program because there hasn't been a regulatory incentive to manage them. Another key component of your asset inventory is documenting any relevant historical data like maintenance history or replacement history. So after you collect all of this information, it should all live in your asset inventory. And make sure this inventory is in a centralized location so everyone updating it knows where it lives. As you get started, it doesn't matter where you fall on this data management line, whether you start off with paper
or a spreadsheet or GIS or more sophisticated software. The most important thing is keeping the data up to date. If you implement a sophisticated system in your community and no one's updating it, it quickly becomes outdated. So now that you've created your asset inventory, you'll want to think through how best to incorporate edits as they arrive. Think through these workflows and which staff will be updating the data and when, and at what frequency. For example, how are structural repairs handled in town? Is this completed through some sort of digital tracking tool? So a DPW staff could flag it in the field and then report and close out the issue. Thinking through all these workflows are imperative and will save time by keeping the inventory changes up to date. You can also set up GIS tools like dashboards or other digital tools that can help keep track of progress for your day-to-day operations. Another important component of the asset inventory is the asset condition. Oftentimes, your DPW crew can provide a lot of the upfront information because before a formal condition assessment is started. Just knowing whether an asset is broken versus not, or putting an asset into an adequate, poor, critical, or failed categories could be sufficient upfront. And then as you have more time and resources, a more formal condition assessment can be utilized, like the NASCO ranking for structure and pipe assessments, or the NAC system for culvert assessments. And these assessments can be completed with various types of equipment, whether it's a zoom camera, underwater drone, or a CCTV crawl camera. Now that you've completed an inventory and your initial condition of your assets, how are you going to track your program's success? This is done through establishing a level of service. So this is the goals and the vision of the program. And this goal should be agreed upon by stakeholders and departments and should address community-specific needs. So there's a varying level of cost depending on how you initially define your level of service. For kind of a minimum standard compliance, usually is the lowest cost. You have a protective level of service, which usually are kind of proactive goals. And then if you kind of define a more advanced level of service, you're getting into like a more expensive program. So once the vision of the program is agreed upon, you want to set up kind of smarter goals that are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time-bound, and ones that that you can evaluate and then are repeatable. And these goals are great to, track progress and success within the program. So after you establish the goals of the program and complete your inventory and your condition assessment, the criticality analysis is really providing you a defensible framework for which assets should be prioritized and when. So criticality is made up of two things. You have probability of failure, or POF, and then consequence of failure, or COF. Your probability of failure scores an asset based on how likely that asset is to fail. An asset's POF can be evaluated and scored based on the following parameters, such as condition, age, material, maybe capacity. Your consequence of failure is more subjective, and this scores an asset based on how influential the asset is to the overall system. The COF is determined by the severity of the impact based on a host of criteria, like the economic, social, environmental, or safety impact. So these two components make up your overall criticality rank. And when you plot an asset based on both scores, it will fall into one of those quadrants, which represent low, moderate, or high risk. So here is one example of what your criticality analysis might look like. In this example, each point represents a stormwater asset, say a culvert. And in this example, we see that there's a culvert that's falling into one of the four quadrants. To note, assets that fall in this kind of high criticality bucket have a high POF and high COF. Those assets are recommended to be addressed immediately. While you have assets in the upper left quadrant, which have high POF but low COF, those assets, that's a moderate criticality in those assets are recommended to be aggressively maintained. And then you have assets falling into the high COF, low POF. Those are also a kind of a medium moderate criticality, but those assets is recommended to aggressively monitor. The assets that have low POF and low COF have low criticality, and those are recommended to keep that a community kind of keeps up with routine maintenance and monitoring so they don't end up shifting into one of the other three quadrants. So another important component of an asset management plan is really evaluating the life cycle costs of each of these assets. The cost should quantify the construction, maintenance, replacement, and rehab costs to maintain the stormwater assets. Keep in mind, most stormwater systems are largely playing catch up because assets have been left alone for so long. If this is the case, start with an action plan and start with your high critical assets first. As you make progress, and then continually making progress from there. And then as you make progress in your AMP, start calculating the cost of other parts and components of your stormwater program. So you have your capital improvement projects, which your culvert replacements will fall into, or kind of stormwater control measure installations. You have kind of annual O&M costs, which you'll start, quantifying your catch basin cleaning and street sweeping, stormwater staff salaries, and then other program management and compliance costs. So, kind of accounting for your annual reporting and record keeping. So now that you've established the cost of all your assets, it'll soon become clear if you have any funding gap and if you have to how to keep your stormwater system functioning based on kind of your desired level of service that you defined. For most communities, the need is often greater than the available funds. And so this is a good time to start exploring other long-term sustainable funding strategies. One way, as we've heard earlier today, is to set up a stormwater utility. But for other communities, it might not be politically feasible, and you might only be able to fund part of your stormwater program. These communities often rely on other grant funding, like the ones listed on the slide, and also rely on partnerships with watershed organizations and others, volunteers, to support the stormwater program.
So I'll be giving kind of a high-level overview of 4 case studies where municipalities put together stormwater asset management programs. And the message that we really want to get across is that one size asset management program doesn't fit all. So whenever development of an asset management program begins, the municipality really has to figure out what works best for them in terms of data management, workflows, procedures to best meet their specific program goals. And while we'll be discussing just a few examples, you can see that stormwater asset management programs are really picking up steam across Massachusetts. This map is just the communities that Ty and Bond has worked with in the last 5 or 7 years. And this is also only stormwater or culvert specific AMPs. This is excluding water and sewer asset management projects that we've worked on. And many of these stormwater AMPs are through Mass DEP's asset management planning grant, which is a really great resource. And the color coding on the map just corresponds to the population of the community. So you can see that larger cities and really small towns have been successful in implementing and developing an AMP. The first case study I will run through is Westford. Back in the days of EPA's 2003 small MS4 stormwater permit, Westford was doing what they could to meet the permit requirements, address emergencies as they arose. In 2013, the town's residents committed to development of a stormwater management master plan. And that was a 5-year planning process to develop the plan that integrated MS4 program compliance, identification of needed drainage capital improvement projects, and also an evaluation of funding needs. Thank you, Rep. Tellis. During this work, the town leveraged a grant as well to multiple grants, but one specifically to improve stormwater GIS mapping, build a more robust asset inventory, and complete actual condition assessments throughout the town's drainage system to get a better understanding of condition. And the planning process was used to build support as well for a stormwater utility. A stormwater advisory group was established to drive the plan. It included members from town and residents from the community. The SWAG developed a new logo, which you can see in the bottom right there, and branding for the stormwater program. They made educational press releases and public access TV videos. And despite the very robust 5-year educational campaign, stakeholder workshops, public input, and answering questions, the initial attempt to adopt the stormwater utility just narrowly failed at town meeting in 2019 in the spring. But instead of putting it on the shelf, they doubled down on their messaging and they were successful in passing it at special meeting later that year. The master plan identified a need for almost triple the town's annual expenditures on stormwater, and the projected revenue from the enterprise fund, the stormwater utility, would help provide the more protective level of service that Westford was looking for their asset management and stormwater master plan. While completing the planning process for the master plan, it became apparent that there was a lack of information about the town's culverts and specifically. And yet, even with that very limited information that they had, it was already driving more than like half of the drainage infrastructure capital projects on their budget. So to address this, they took on completing a dedicated culvert inventory and asset management program where they mapped and inspected all of their municipal culverts and prioritized repairs and replacement needs. I know, stormwater everywhere. The report was ended up providing a roadmap for the town to be able to implement recommendations, and Westford took action immediately to start addressing the critical culverts that were identified. So over the last few years, the town has replaced 2 culverts, and there's another 3 currently in design. And by having the master plan and the culvert plan, the request for funding appropriations for specific projects doesn't come as a surprise. Holy moly. So the town has been able to successfully implement the plan, implement the utility, and they've also been able to hire new engineering staff to support the program. I am not reading these quotes to you, but we did reach out to some folks involved in these projects just so that you can hear their words and their point of view. What did asset management mean to this town? So Westford's Stormwater Management Master Plan, their culvert asset management plan, allowed the town to change from a more reactive approach to a more proactive approach to drainage improvements, O&M, bigger capital projects. And having local champions drive the program ensured that the public understood and supported the need for the enterprise fund. And now that the program is in place, the town can continue to invest in improvement of the program and implementation of the plan. Billerica developed a strong stormwater management program under the 2003 MS4 permit, and they have a GIS coordinator in-house that developed a comprehensive asset inventory and a GIS map of the drainage system. And the town further invested in the program by bringing a dedicated stormwater engineer on board in 2022. And while the town did have a good understanding of most of its stormwater system, the culverts were a gap in the overall program. So we worked a few years ago with the engineering division to develop a more formal asset management program through that Mass DEP asset management grant. And we filled in more of the blanks in the inventory for the municipal culverts. More than 200 culverts were assessed and conditions evaluated, and that data was used to determine a risk-based priority ranking following the criticality assessments that Natalie outlined earlier. And one of the major takeaways from Billerica's A&P is that there were many locations throughout town that were submerged, which could potentially indicate hydraulic restrictions. And another recommendation, which will not be surprising to anybody here, is that some of the corrugated metal culverts were deteriorated and needed to be addressed. So these findings were incorporated into a multi-year action plan for culvert improvement projects, maintenance, and overall program implementation. As a very quick case study within a case study, another striking takeaway from Billerica's AMP was during the extreme flooding that occurred in many communities in August 2023 timeframe. The crossing shown here was actually not evaluated during the AMP fieldwork because it was a small span bridge and our work was focused on culverts that had a span less than 10 feet. And the condition of the crossing was unknown to the town. It wasn't on Mass DOT's radar, even though it was a bridge for their routine inspection program. And you can see the storm exacerbated the condition of the crossing, and 2 of the barrels actually failed during that storm. And to account for this, the town has had to adapt their CIP and their whole planning process to be able to account for the emergency, and is currently working through design of a replacement structure that maybe wasn't a known priority at the beginning. So like many communities, Billerica has been severely impacted with larger storms, inland flooding, and it's really emphasized the importance of properly sized culverts. So thank you for bearing with me in the case study. In a case study, since 2023, the town's been able to use the findings of the AMP to support successful grant applications for the Division of Ecological Restoration DER grant for preliminary design of 2 culvert replacement projects, as well as an MVP grant. And the MVP grant had a significant public education component to it. But we also took a look at those submerged culverts identified in the AMP, did some additional field assessments to really try to put eyes on them, figure out what the condition was, and complete a conceptual hydraulics analysis to help kind of narrow down and reprioritize the culvert that were critical to the town. And so even communities with robust stormwater programs can still benefit from formalizing an asset management program. Billerica started adding culverts to the overall stormwater program and recognizes that the cost to proactively address critical culverts can be pretty immense. So while it was determined that a stormwater utility was not politically feasible for Billerica at this time, the town's continuing to use general fund dollars, DPW operating budgets to fund the program, and leveraging grants as much as possible. And the data collected during the AMP fieldwork has been helpful in support of those grant applications. Air is a small community that has historically handled the stormwater program in-house with some stormwater collaborative support. Back in 2011, the town had actually approved an enterprise fund, but it was never implemented, and then it was eventually dissolved. So through the MVP planning process, development of an AMP was identified as a high priority project for the town. And while most of the stormwater infrastructure was previously mapped, historically, familiar story, maintenance and repairs may have been neglected with competing priorities. And the town also had extremely limited information on culverts. So it was determined that the AMP would help be able to address these issues. The Mass DEP Asset Management Grant was awarded, and they completed condition assessments for drainage infrastructure, a majority of the town's culvert crossings. And the criticality assessment, these are the results shown here on the slide, it really revealed that a large majority of the culverts were in good shape. They're in that bottom half where the likelihood of failure is not bad, they're in good shape. But the high criticality culverts and other recommendations were incorporated into a 5-year action plan. And at the end of that effort with, you've been seeing these budget numbers on the slides, right, for just a short-term action plan. They're big numbers. And at the conclusion of the AMP, it became apparent to the town that there was a gap in the town's available funding versus the list of recommended projects. And it identified the need for a sustainable funding resource. So to address this, AIR decided to dust off the Stormwater Enterprise Fund. They established a Stormwater Utility Advisory Work Group to guide the process, which was spearheaded by the DPW director as the local champion there. And it also included members from the community as well as town departments. And they completed a robust education campaign, dedicated website, presentations, and at each step of the process, they could point to the AMP results as justification for the issues that the town was facing in their stormwater program. They provided the backup with photos for the budget numbers being presented. And that socialization and public effort, outreach effort did end up resulting with the ultimate adoption of the updated stormwater management fund last year. So a decade after AIR dissolved its first stormwater utility, the development of the A&P provided the town with the information needed to give it another go. The improved asset inventories, condition information, a prioritized list of recommended projects, all laid the groundwork to provide justification to the community to invest in the stormwater program. And lastly, in late 2024, DER solicited bids to assess culverts in municipalities that were identified by DER, or subwatersheds rather, that were identified by DER as being high priority because they had very little culvert inventory information in the NAC database. I'm not going to read that to you, that's at the bottom. And that they considered a high ecological value. Ty and Bonds partnered with the Blackstone Watershed Collaborative to perform these assessments and develop asset inventories for Grafton and Upton within the Blackstone Watershed. And while DER's goal here was to identify culverts with culverts where improvements would provide ecological restoration, like improving stream channel or a replacement would meet stream crossing standards where it currently doesn't. We also evaluated culverts for a more financial and societal impact, where we considered things like flooded roads, public safety, and cost of replacement. And while the previous towns I've mentioned did have some level of information about culverts in their GIS, Grafton and Upton did not. So their culvert inventory was developed completely from scratch. We started with a desktop GIS assessment to identify potential culvert crossings and then field verified those during the field work. We trained local staff on the NAC procedures and evaluated both culvert condition and aquatic passage for more than 300 culverts in the two towns. The data was collected in GIS so that the towns could have usable software and data asset inventory so that they could reference back to their size, material, and criticality scoring. It was also input into the NAC database, so it's publicly available, potentially in support of future grant applications as well. And the culverts were prioritized for both those ecological restoration potential and the societal and financial consequence of failure. This project was just completed in June, a few months ago, and the town of Grafton has already leveraged the data to support a grant application. So they were successfully awarded a DER culvert replacement municipal assistance grant to begin design of the highest priority culvert identified for Grafton as part of that project. So Upton and Grafton have, in less than 6 months, developed a comprehensive culvert inventory, completed condition assessments of all of their municipal culverts, and have a risk-based prioritization of needed improvements. They're armed with a GIS database that can be referenced to support funding requests, and they can keep using it and implementing it moving forward. So to summarize, stormwater asset management programs can be an extremely beneficial approach to formalize and improve current practices. It can help take a community from reactive to proactive management of an infrastructure that has historically been largely neglected. And it can provide justification to local decision makers and stakeholders and grant agencies for funding requests. And it can give communities a roadmap to address critical infrastructure needs. While the core components of an asset management program will look very similar across any community, each component can be adapted for what that specific community needs. Approaches can vary for program implementation, data collection, funding methodologies. The processes and the workflows should be customized to make sure that it works for you. And the data should be routinely visited so that as the program is implemented, to make sure it reflects current conditions and if any of your goals are changing and evolving. And lastly, if you're not sure where to get started, there are many resources available to help. So the grant funding, that Mass DEP grant funding is a good opportunity to at least develop a framework of an asset management program. You can determine asset condition, develop a budget, potentially complete a stormwater utility feasibility study. That's an eligible activity under the DEP grant. Local watershed associations, stormwater collaboratives, as we've heard, often have resources that can help. And often an important key to success is just finding that town staff or elected official that's really willing to take on championing the program. Thank you very much for your time today, bearing with us.